and we are back for the Season 8, Episode 2 Series Q&A. Why do people in the series bother with building castles when every time an enemy approaches, they march outside the walls to meet them in the field, and then even talk about taking defensive positions on higher ground? This is a pretty interesting question and worth going into in detail. Castles are on a basic level a fortified position, allowing for an army greater protection and advantageous striking. They are a force multiplier, and John even tells us in the book that one man in a castle like the Dreadfort is worth 50 outside. So why wouldn't one use a castle if one had one? Well, the obvious real answer is that it looks better on screen. Armies clashing in the field is an exciting sight, allowing wider shots with full swinging weapons. There was little reason for Ramsay to meet Stannis in the field, or for Ramsay to meet Jon in the field, but he did so both times. But is there ever really a logical reason to abandon a castle? Well, historically, fixed fortified positions did have a glaring weakness in that they were fixed. An invading army could simply avoid the castle, and this wouldn't be a bad strategy for the White Walkers. They could just march right by Winterfell, continue to conquer south, and grow their army. Another weakness with being fixed is food and water. An army stuck inside a castle can't resupply, and so a siege can essentially starve a castle out. The White Walkers could simply surround Winterfell and wait. However, neither of these situations really seems to apply. The White Walkers are supposedly in pursuit of Bran, and impatiently so they won't be avoiding Winterfell or laying siege, but instead they'll be trying to take the castle with haste. And so at first glance, it would seem absolutely logical for everyone to stay inside Winterfell. After all, it's easier to kill a White who's trying to climb a wall and you're up from above, than one that's running towards you at ground level. And the White Walkers don't appear to have any siege weapons like trebuchets. We shall see if they have ladders and battering rams. Now there is one big thing that could shift the strategy: the undead dragon. It may not be so smart to centralize everyone in one place, knowing that a dragon can fly in and roast everyone. But then again, Winterfell has two dragons of its own to deal with that one dragon. But then again, those two dragons are supposedly dealing with the Night King. But then again, the Night King should be with his dragon. So these air elements should just all be occupied with each other. So all in all, I don't see much use in having anyone outside the castle. I suppose they could be there to prevent ladders or battering rams from being used, or to prevent a particularly weak section of the wall from being breached or climbed, but it seems like any forces outside of the castle would be overwhelmed pretty quickly. I personally would have shift after shift after shift of archers raining down dragonglass arrows on the White Army. If each man is ordered to kill 10 Whites, that should take care of the army of the dead. I'm curious, when did George R.R. Martin say the book and the show would end the same way? Was it fairly recently, or years ago when it was thought that the book series would be finished around the same time or before? I've been assuming they chose a somewhat different ending so as to not spoil the books. So George R. R. Martin has talked about this issue many times before, but his most recent discussion was in his 60 Minutes interview with Anderson Cooper. And this interview is a doozy. It's a clusterfuck of contradiction, which, if you listen to George R. R. Martin speak a lot, you know it's par for the course. This is actually one of the problems I have with taking George's word in interviews as some sort of sacred word of God. He's a human being who's trying to not spoil his own books, and he can be very inconsistent, just like the rest of us. So this is what I'm talking about. So Anderson Cooper asks, when it was clear they were catching up, you told them over a kind of overarching future of where you saw the last two books going in terms of plot? And George R. R. Martin responds, yes, and the major beats. I mean, obviously we're talking about a several days of story conferences taking place in my home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but there's no way to get in all the detail, all the minor characters, all the secondary characters. The series has been extremely faithful compared to 97% of all television and movie adaptations of literary properties, but it's not completely faithful, and it can't be, otherwise it would have to run another 5 seasons. And so according to Martin, he's told D&D the major plot points, and this wasn't just in one meeting, it was over several days. That's a lot of time to convey information. It sounds like he gave up the main plot and that the show is going to spoil the books. But then George hedges a little bit and says that not everything was turned over, the secondary characters. The series has been faithful, but not completely faithful, claiming it would need 5 more seasons. He's essentially claiming that half the story has been left out. And so Anderson Cooper understandably wants some clarification. And so he asks, and in essence, by the time the series is finished, and your other 2 books are finished, Essentially, it's going to be two separate, different, yeah, two different versions. But I think that's true of every adaptation. We got all these Spider-Man. Is it Stan Lee's Spider-Man from the comic books? They're similar, but they're also different. Things happen to one that's never happened to the other. Things are resolved differently. The girlfriends are shuffled and reshuffled. The primary beats are there, the character is there, but it's a question of what are the choices you make to tell the story, which are partially dictated by your medium. And so now George is making the statement that the stories are going to be really different. If you take Spider Man as an example, we're talking about a pretty big variance between what happened in the comic versus the movies. For example, Venom crash lands on Earth and eventually dies in Spider Man 3. That's a huge departure from the comics where Spider Man finds him on Battleworld during the Secret Wars, and of course, in the comics, the alien is still alive. And so now it's clear that Anderson Cooper believes that we're going to have two very different stories, and so he asks, I mean, do you worry that some fans will have Dan and David's ending in their mind's eye? Would that be a disappointment to you? I don't think Dan and Dave's ending is going to be that different from my ending because of the conversation we did have, but they may be on certain secondary characters. There may be big differences. And so George R. R. Martin tries to pull Anderson Cooper back from the idea that the stories are going to be too different. No, the endings will pretty much be the same based on the multi-day meeting they had. Okay, but then George R. R. Martin follows up with this. And yeah, some of the people will have that. There will be a debate, I'm sure. I think a lot of people who say, oh, Dan and Dave's ending is better than the one George gave us. It's a good thing they changed it. And there will be a lot of people who say, no, Dan and Dave got it wrong. George's ending is better. And they will all fight on the internet and there will be a debate, and that's fine. I mean, the worst thing for any work of art, be it a movie or a book, is to be ignored. So now he thinks there will be different endings, significant enough that people will argue about it on the internet. And so you can see it's a whole lot of hedging and equivocation on the issue of whether or not the book and the show are going to be the same, especially with the ending, and Anderson Cooper never really gets a clear answer. The major beats are supposed to be the same, whatever major beats are. I thought John Connington's invasion was a pretty major beat, but that's not there, so who knows? And if you ask me, the lack of clarity is likely because George R. R. Martin is a human being talking about an unwritten book and an unaired show. In truth, he doesn't really know how either one is going to end. Why do you think the Night's King would care about destroying the world's memory? Does this line give us any clues as to why the others are back, or any of their motivations besides killing humans? Yeah, I've thought about this a bit, and I'm not completely sure. So the whole we're nothing more than memories, we aren't really gone as long as people remember us, end of Star Trek II thing, is very George R. R. Martin. We should remember that Jojen tells Bran that as long as he remembers Old Nan, she's still alive, and the A Song in A Song of Ice and Fire is likely referring to memories, as George R. R. Martin's writing is filled with references to hive-mindedness as a song. Not to mention that the Children of the Forest are essentially a repository of memories in the werewood net, and they call themselves those that sing the Song of Earth. The story is all about memories, remnants, and ghosts, and it seems that in the show, the Night King is trying to destroy Bran's song. But the question is why? Why does the Night King give a shit? Why does he need the complete and utter destruction of the memory of man? Well, it could simply be to erase the idea that Dragonglass kills them, or it could be to prevent the notion of time travel, which is likely screwing everything up, or perhaps he's nothing more than a metaphor for death and seeks absolute death. Then again, it could be simpler. We should remember that the Night King was created by the Children of the Forest to kill humanity, and so he might just be following his mission or his programming. He might be like a computer, and when the Children of the Forest said, kill all humans, he said, bleep bloop bleep bloop, kill all humans, but this really means kill all record of humanity, which would also include the Children of the Forest's memory. And this could have been the Children of the Forest's big mistake. They wanted just the humans to be killed, but the Night King decided that all records of humans needed to be killed. And so the whole project got out of control. Now, of course, none of this really explains the Night King's return, or how Craster came about, or the significance of dragons, or Jon's resurrection. And part of me wonders if the White Walkers are really after Bran or Gilly's baby. After all, Sam stole a baby that was promised to them. But then again, Bran is essentially omniscient, and he hasn't brought up any of these things as issues, so I guess they're not that important. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. And that's all the questions for now. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.